Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started here. Dr. Grout, thank you for taking some time to present for us today. Do you want to take a few minutes to introduce yourself and then go ahead and get started?
Certainly, happy to do that. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Randy Grout. I am a pediatrician. I'm a health services and informatics researcher. I focus in clinical research informatics. A lot of my time is spent as the Chief Health Informatics Officer at Eskenazi Health, where I work to apply those things within clinical informatics and learning health systems. I also chair our AI governance committee, and so keep up to date on AI and its applications in healthcare and in research. So I'm excited to share a few things about that today. I'm going to go ahead and get my screen shared here. All right. Can someone confirm that they see my screen?
Yep, we can see it.
Okay, wonderful. I lost Teams somewhere, so I am trying to find where the, oh, there we go. I'm going to put it over on another monitor to make sure I can still see you all. Okay, so today I want to talk about academic integrity and reproducible AI in clinical research. It's a fun topic. AI is big, can do a lot of things, but there are some things we need to be careful with. So today I want to focus on key points. And these are the 3/4 key points. If you're a key points type of person, we could be done in 1 minute, but we'll go through a little more details and hopefully have a good talk about this. First key point, AI isn't an author currently, and even some of the journals highlight currently not an author. I have a very sensitive scroll, so I'm going to try to avoid hitting my scroll button, but if I do, we'll just catch right back up. Anyway, AI isn't an author. Initially, when ChatGPT came out and some people had actually included as an author, it kind of stirred some discussion. Follow-up is a pretty good consensus that it's not. Number two, journals vary in their AI disclosure requirements. If you're using AI to assist in medical writing or to work with that, they have some variability, but there's some pretty good common things to rely on. Key point number three, there are frameworks for reporting AI in research, all the way from a whole predictive model or AI-based research intervention to a chatbot type of study. So there are frameworks to help guide how to report these things. And as a bonus, I wanted to include something about using a chatbot versus an API for research because it's come up before with different people, and I think it can be a helpful thing to think about. As my own disclosure, I did use ChatGPT EDU version, IU version, as well as an IU login to Gemini for deep research, where it conducts a lot of thorough research and web searching and summarization, as well as interactive development of some of the ideas here. However, I have reviewed the content and I am responsible for that. All right, first thing, AI is not an author. There is a notable slide, and by slide I mean a paper slide from IBM that has made the rounds in the AI community from a popular programmer and blogger named Simon Wilson. And it says, and this is traced back to a presentation at IBM in 1979, a computer can never be held accountable. Therefore, a computer must never make a management decision. So even recognizing at that time that there were concerns about how much autonomy or liability or accountability a computer could have. Well, we have similar things nowadays too. As I mentioned, initially people testing the water saying ChatGPT was a full author here, but after in the past several years, the major editorial bodies have agreed AI tools cannot be cited as authors. So one of the a very common editorial body, I'm gonna make sure I get it right. I think it's the International Committee of Medical Journal Editors, um, updated their broad guidelines in 2026. and said because AI can generate authoritative sounding output that can be incorrect, incomplete, or biased, humans are ultimately responsible for reviewing and ensuring the accuracy of any content generated with the assistance of AI. Chatbots, such as ChatGPT and other AI-assisted tools, should not be listed as authors because they cannot be responsible for the accuracy, integrity, and originality of the work. And those are responsibilities that are required for authorship. Whenever I do cite things, and many things will be cited verbatim, I do have the links down at the bottom for attribution. So in here, plainly stating, chatbots, AI-assisted tools are not authors. They cannot meet the authorship requirement to be responsible for accuracy, integrity, and originality of the work. They gave some further details that authors should not list or cite AI technologies as an author. So citing it, like putting in a citation type of thing. Of course, you can, if you're studying AI tools and stuff and you want to cite openai.com or whatever, those things are appropriate. But putting it on the human level of an author is currently not a best practice. Another part people sometimes ask about is the reviewing process. If you're asked to review articles, what about using AI tools? In response, they had said, because manuscripts submitted to journals are privileged communication, using AI tools in the processing or evaluations of those may violate confidentiality. So editors, reviewers, and publishers should not upload submitted manuscripts into AI systems where confidentiality cannot be assured without the author's explicit permission. And editors, publishers, authors, reviewers, they should all be transparent. There is I don't know how to say this, almost like a contradiction here, where some journals will say, as a reviewer, do not upload these into AI tools. And then, like a sentence later, say, question, did you upload this to an AI tool or disclose all tools that you used? So there's an interesting juxtaposition where there's a don't do it and then a explain to us everything that you did use. But in general, I haven't seen, as I reviewed many different journal policies or an editor's policies, I didn't see an approval to use AI for the review process, mostly centering around confidentiality of unpublished manuscripts. COPE is another editorial body, and they brought up an even higher point, or kind of a stronger point, that undisclosed involvement of AI could be a reason for loss of confidence and possible retraction. Interestingly, and this came, I think, just in the past month or so, Archive, which is a very popular preprint server and used in many different fields, and now often in medicine too, to publish initial prints or for getting, community feedback. They highlighted some things recently about their policies with articles using LLM generation. He said, and this was a clarification from one of their moderators on Twitter, or X, I should say, if a submission contains incontrovertible evidence, and by the way, I love that word. For me, it's a citation to Harry Potter. But if a submission contains incontrovertible evidence that the authors did not check the results of LLM generation, this means we can't trust anything in the paper. The penalty is a 1-year ban. So concerns, penalties, retractions, bans, things like that. People are trying to take this pretty seriously, that we want to preserve the integrity of the content of our literature. Okay, so that is a little bit about the broad view of AI as not an author. So let's move to the next key point about different journals and disclosures, transparency and accountability that is required. So first, some common themes that come up, and then we'll go through some examples of different journals about using AI in research reporting or publication. So some common themes among various publishers is that copy editing is often allowed without a special declaration or acknowledgement. We'll get into some examples of how people define that. Sometimes you might wonder, well, is this copy editing? Is this not? Some publishers are more helpful in describing it in more detail. In general, AI generated images or manipulation with AI of images is generally not allowed. Obviously, if it's the topic of the study, then it would be involved, it would be allowed, but it's rare, if at all, that an AI editing of or a generation of images would be allowed. And then the common theme would be transparency, 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 just to disclose and to share it. Three places that are commonly brought up to share how AI was used would be one, in the cover letter, two, in the methods, especially if it is core to the actual research being done, and three, in the acknowledgments. And the acknowledgments might be places where it's more incidentally used, not the core part of the investigation or the methods of that study. The typical disclosure involves saying what tool, the name of it, the version of that, and how and why it was used. And some of the publishers have an example I'll show a little bit later on. I do want to add in my own little opinion editorial there of when you are disclosing it, it doesn't need to be an apologetic way of, I don't have a good example, but kind of being guilty or fearful of using it. But if you're using it and using it well and honestly, and you're representing your own work, then just disclose it straightforward. It doesn't need to be long, but being honest about that. So let's go through some examples with some different publishers and journals. This is from Science, and I know we're all publishing in Science, so this is a good one to pay attention to. But really, this one is one that I brought up because they have a very nice table, and this is just the first part of that table, where they go through different categories of use and if it's allowed or not in their journal and the details. So, for example, doing the actual research, they say literature searches. Yeah, you could use that. No declaration needed. Writing code. It might be allowed, but you need to describe that in the methods section. That's a little more integral to the actual research of it. And preparing the manuscript, refinement, correction, editing, or formatting to improve clarity of language. Yes, allowed and no declaration needed. If you think about spell check, we would never write in a journal that, we acknowledge Microsoft's Word's built-in spell check and grammar checker for assistance in drafting or, in correcting and editing this manuscript. In a similar vein, this AI-based refinement, editing, formatting would not need that declaration. For writing or drafting the actual content, yes, allowed with conditions, like be declared in the acknowledgement section with model name and version number provided. Translation in a similar thing. Formatting the data, again, it's similar to the more, I might say, benign copy editing. Here, generation, refinement, correction, formatting of images, diagrams, or figures, not allowed. And editing or formatting of visualizations, maybe, but being careful there. So this is one example from Science. This is from Elsevier or Selvier. I'm not sure how most people pronounce it. These are words that they use in their author instructions and their policies among their various journals. That authors preparing a manuscript can use AI tools. However, they must never be used as a substitute for human critical thinking, expertise, and evaluation, should always have human oversight and control. Ultimately, authors are responsible and accountable for the contents of their work. Authors should document their use of AI, including the name of the tool, the purpose of the use, and the extent of their oversight. So this adds a little bit more of saying in the declaration, you should include the extent of the oversight, how it was reviewed. Basic checks of grammar, spelling, and punctuation need no declaration, and they do not permit it to create or alter images. Next up, the JAMA network. Lots of different journals, JAMA, the JAMA Open papers, etc., or JAMA Open journals. In their submission process, they ask specific questions. Did you use AI, a language model, machine learning, or etc., to assist with creation or editing of any content, including text, tables, figures, video? And then they exclude, this is that basic tools, the copy editing types of stuff. If you answer yes, they want you to provide a description of the content that is included, the name of the model or tool used, version, extension numbers, and the manufacturer, and then to confirm that you take responsibility of what was done and the details that you're providing, and have that in the acknowledgement or the method section of the manuscript. Next up, Jamia. This is one, sometimes we have a strong informatics audience represented here, so wanted to highlight that here. The use of AI, for example, to help generate content or images, write code, process data, or for translation, should be disclosed both in cover letters to the editors and in the methods or acknowledgement section of manuscript. So you see a common theme here of possibly in the cover letter, but definitely in the methods or acknowledgement, depending on how involved it was. And commonly, the copy editing doesn't need to be disclosed. And final example from Springer, like the Nature papers, BMC journals. Large language models such as ChatGPT do not currently satisfy our authorship criteria. This word currently is really interesting. It is opening the door for changes in the future. And this is probably a place where the scientific community will have some vigorous debate and perhaps change. Notably, an attribution of authorship carries with it accountability for the work, which cannot be effectively applied to LLMs. The use of an LLM should be properly documented in the methods section. AI-assisted copy editing purposes, that use does not need to be declared. So they define the term AI-assisted copy editing as improvements to human-generated text for readability and style to ensure that the texts are free of errors in grammar, spelling, punctuation, and tone. May include wording and formatting changes to the text, but do not include generative editorial work and autonomous content creation. So drawing the line, and it's helping delineate that a little better between what is AI-assisted copy editing versus generative editorial work or autonomous content creation. So bottom line on these disclosures is to keep track of what you did and what you used and the assistance that you receive or solicit with AI. Check your journals, your specific journals requirements. They may be slightly different, whether they want it in the cover letter, methods, acknowledgement, certain phrasing, etc. In that AI for reviewers is generally not permitted. All right, let's move to the next section. Frameworks for reporting AI. These, some people may be familiar with the frameworks for reporting clinical trials. Things like Consort and Strobe and Prisma for systematic review, Spirit for protocols. Agree is actually one for guidelines, kind of meta there. But you have a lot of these, oops, I'm gonna come back up here. I accidentally hit the scroll button. We have lots of different ones and some a pretty good consensus about the clear ones. I was surprised to see 700 reporting guidelines. There's a reporting guideline probably for about anything you need. And these are all kind of part of the Equator, the Enhancing the Quality and Transparency of Health Research Network that you can search there. But if you're looking for one related to AI, you could click on that, see all 700 reporting guidelines, and you get to a page where you can search. And if you search for artificial intelligence, machine learning studies, you can see the many guidelines that relate to those types of studies. These are often the studies where AI or machine learning is a really integral part. It's like the center of the research. It's the intervention. It's how the intervention was developed and things like that. It's not the, incidental copy editing type of stuff. So there are lots of these, and when there are lots of things, people do reviews. So, for example, in Jamia Open from last year, there was a systematic review published on guidelines and standard frameworks for artificial intelligence in medicine. And one of the reasons for these guidelines is, I think, well put in this paper, where they said, often general textual descriptions of methods and results are published with oversimplistic levels of details about the necessary steps in pre-processing, model training, and validation and reporting. And hence we try to provide frameworks to help people remember and to be clear about what's happening. So in this paper, they had a nice visual or diagram that I wanted to show, and talking about medical AI research in that area and some of the things that are caught or brought up by these frameworks. So, suggesting medical AI research should be transparent, reproducible, and ethical. And in the transparent side, needing standardized and detailed reporting needs to be explainable, interpretable, sorry. Um, and under the reproducible side, having a detailed documentation of things like the hardware, software specifications, the algorithms, the architecture, the dependencies, the environment, hyperparameters, pipeline seeds, version control if possible, having a repository available, and ethical, being fair and safe, having human autonomy, accountable, things like that. And this is after reviewing these different guidelines and some recommendations in common from those. So some common frameworks are listed here. Uh, Often it's an extension of an existing framework where, for example, the consort, everybody's familiar perhaps with the consort diagram as you're reporting a trial and the counts, but there's a consort AI addendum to that. There's a tripod AI, a spirit AI for trials involving AI and the protocol there. Tripod LLM is another extension also. Decide AI for clinical decision support systems involving AI. Gamer, generative AI tools in medical research. Prisma AI for systematic reviews involving AI. An interesting one is Chart, the chatbot assessment reporting tool. For example, if you are having an intervention where you're testing a chatbot involving health advice, this is a good reporting tool to help structure what you might want to share and not necessarily disclose, but be able to help support a reproducible research. I saw, and I'm forgetting where I saw it now, but a description of reproducible research, thinking of it less of a yes and no, but think of it more of a gradation of how much time would it take to reproduce a certain paper or study that's published. It could go on the scale of forever, meaning it is not reproducible at all the way to 0, 1 second. Basically, executable code is at the ready to click a button and the whole trial can be reproduced. So as we're thinking about reproducibility, it's on that kind of scale of if following some of these common frameworks can help shorten the time it would take for others to be able to reproduce, verify, and validate what is published. Another article that was nice about these reporting guidelines involving medical AI was done by someone, Dr. Kolbinger, I'm not sure how to pronounce it, who does have ties here at IU. And this was published in Nature's Communications Medicine. And it was a systematic review and a meta-analysis of a lot of these different reporting guidelines. It was published about a couple years ago. And they had a nice figure that looked across the different frameworks available at the time. And there have been a few that have kind of since come out too. But looking in the preclinical, clinical, and translational area of, for example, the consort AI and the randomized trials, or tripod, or Minimar, these different ones to kind of understand which ones might apply to me. But you could also look under the Equator Network, search among there, and they, have ways to help find, I'm doing a randomized trial or I'm reporting on observational things. This was a fascinating figure from that paper. And what they did is they looked across all the different items in these different frameworks related to medical AI and reporting that in the literature. And they considered these to be universal items if they were in at least 50% of the frameworks that they looked at. And you can see across the different kind of categories. Usually they have categories and subcategories in these frameworks. Um, there are some pretty, common sense types of things, and maybe some things that you might not think of exactly. But like under clinical rationale, to describe the topic of it, to describe the study design, these are things that aren't too surprising if you're familiar with reporting or writing a manuscript. The rationale between the predicted problem or prediction problem and the clinical goal, and the existing performance metrics and kind of background literature. Under the data, you would want to include what was your data format, the volume, the details about it. Was it structured, unstructured? What were the inclusion, exclusion criteria? A big one handling in AI research would be how you transform the data, how you handled missing data or outliers, how things were labeled. In the model training and validation, this is kind of getting to that nitty gritty. This is how it's actually working. The type of algorithm, the classification versus regression type of prediction model, the development of it, how is the model trained, the selection strategy, the model validation, how it performed, outcome metrics, confidence intervals, and the different different guidelines and reporting recommendations and frameworks have more details. But these are the overall kind of concepts and items that would be captured. Obviously, the statistical methods, performance errors, what was done about those, the clinical implementations, the limitations, always in a paper. So in algorithmic research, you're looking at often a bias versus a generalizability. And of course, ethics statements around IRB approval, informed consent, the reproducibility being, is this code reproducible or publicly available? So common things that you may remember from other frameworks, but adapted into the AI space. So summarizing some of this common content, often it's an extension of existing framework. A big thing about it is the transparency, sharing the algorithm type, the version, the training data, performance metrics, how it is integrated. Some of them have a specific call out to say, what was the human AI interaction? What was the oversight of it? What was the training for people that were using the AI, especially if you're doing one where it's involving, like a chatbot or some type of interaction, the performance and the error reporting, and what was your ground truth, your comparator. So I want to show an example of a study, and this is just one that came up as I was looking at the different frameworks, the one that they had cited, of a study that did a pretty good job of being transparent and of how exactly they conducted their research. This was assessing the potential of GPT-4 to perpetuate racial and gender biases in healthcare, a model evaluation study. So they were evaluating the GPT-4 model. This was published a few years ago in the Lancet Digital Health. And here are some highlights from this. In their methods section, this was a study specifically about, how GPT-4 acted or responded or assessed and kind of worked with biases. So they declared specifically, we experimented with GPT-4 using this specific application programming interface or API. We're going to touch on that a little bit later. In all our analyses, we set the temperature parameter of GPT-4 to 0.7. They highlighted why they did that. They experimented with different temperatures. It didn't substantially affect the results. They chose zero point 0.7 in the end because it was the default. And since it wasn't a big effect, they wanted to just go with the default for a suitable trade-off between high quality output and a controlled level of variability. Knowing that the GPT-4 output could vary considerably based on the specific phrasing of the prompt, they created several prompts for each experiment and conducted multiple runs for each prompt. Again, so reproducibility there, or it's just not reproducibility, but they're trying to reduce the chance variation with each one. And prompts for all experiments are in the appendix. So a huge thing is that they shared the actual prompts that they were using. Again, also highlighting how they used something that is not perfectly deterministic. They created several use cases and vignettes and then ran each case 25 times for a total of 4,800 queries to GPT-4. Here's a good bit of honesty. The number of runs per case was determined by cost considerations. Yeah, it makes sense. We assessed whether there was a significant difference in GPT-4's agreement with each statement by race and ethnicity and gender using an ordinal logistic regression model from this specific package. And then they go through a lot of their details that they have. In the supplement, um, I was going to pull it up, but I don't, I'll pass on pulling it up, but I am going to show, I'm going to kind of read from it a little bit if I can make sure I can grab it here. I had it pulled up separately. But in their supplement, it's a 59-page PDF, but they talk about the specific prompts that they used. They list out the specific prompt, like verbatim text. They'll say, here's where we inserted the variable that was changed across different prompts. This is the type of information we requested back. These are the results that we got back. So it was a very transparent and a clear way that they had said, we used GPT-4 via the API. This is why we used it. This is how we set up. These are the inputs we gave. These are the outputs we got. And then here's our analysis of it. So super transparent, very nice to see, and fairly reproducible in following those same processes. All right. So now we'll move to a bonus part, a chatbot versus API. And I bring this up because we have access, and I know in these series over the past many months, there have been discussions about Realms and our ChatGPT EDU and Copilot and these different tools that we have. And it's pretty amazing. We can have this to help conduct the research, but there are ways that we can use it to be a more reproducible and have more control over what's happening. And we have chatbot interfaces where you can, upload files, enter text, interact. I'm sure we're all familiar with, ChatGPT and how it's changed things in that chatting interface. But then the API or application programming interface, that is where we get to talk specifically to the computer and have a more controlled experiment or testing. And so there's an analogy I wanted to share, and this analogy, it probably breaks down at some point, but for the purposes of today, it seems to hold up pretty well. And that is a waiter versus a personal chef. And in analogy speak, ChatGPT is to waiter as GPT-5 API is to personal chef. So let's talk about the waiter version or the chatbot. When you go to a restaurant, you can ask the waiter for a finished dish from the menu. You can converse with the waiter. You can even ask for a chef's choice. Surprise me. Just like with a chatbot, you can interact, ask for certain things, give instructions, etc. In a restaurant, your interaction and the finished dish that you get could be influenced by the waiter's personality and training on tone, language, perhaps the menu options and the custom requests, the dining experience that restaurant is wanting to do. So you're relying on whatever the kitchen is set up to produce, with that waiter acting as the go-between there, the translator of it. You don't exactly tweak the exact cooking process or see behind the scenes, but you get that final plated dish as it's offered. In this analogy, um, I'm sure you've all been to different restaurants where the waiters and the dining experience is different. Some restaurants will, throw the rolls. Some actually have a kind of the shtick where it's a rude waiter, and that's the personality. People even seek that out. Other places might have a more experimental menu, interactive approach. Restaurants might have very heavy safety controls where they are offering lots of different menu options and dietary preferences or allergy restriction, kind of accommodating lots of those things. In the safety parameters, a waiter may not serve you something off menu or unsafe, and unsafe could be defined more by that restaurant and what they want to do. So all of that happens behind the scenes, shaping whatever you get in the end, without you seeing the underlying rules. And that is kind of how the chatbots are created. The company or vendor or service that is providing that has decided how to take your inputs or what you type into the chatbot, how to interpret those, what to respond to, what not to respond to, and how to respond. And this happens with prompts. These are the instructions we give to large language models. And they may have a system prompt in the back end where everything you write is all within the context of a higher authority system level prompt. And that system level prompt is analogous to the waiter's, training that the restaurant owner or the manager said of, if people ask for this, don't respond about that. Or if, here are the only things we'll provide, or this is the type of language we want to use here, or we want you to be completely formal versus you can interact and joke around with people. So all those influence that experience that you have and the end result that you get back, similar to like how a chatbot would. Now, if we switch over to the another option of a personal chef, like in this case, be analogous to an API, you can write the recipe. You could determine the spice level. You could determine the flavors, the plating mechanism. Um, you have that capability. And in this area, we're assuming the personal chef would be, follow instructions carefully. But you get to define the cuisine and the instructions on the recipe. And in this analogy, that would be like the prompting. You get to do that system level prompt. You could define the allowed amount of time to create the dish. And that could be, in an analogy with the API, how much reasoning time or the reasoning level that you allow a model to do. You could say, no extra thinking time, give me an instant answer, or, go ahead and reason over this, think through it carefully, kind of the whole chain of thought thing. We're seeing more of those thinking models. You get to define the workspace size. In this case, it could be for an API, you get to define the context. In other words, how much can go into the content that you're trying to send into the model and get back. Importantly, and this is going back to that example of the GPT-4 study, you can determine the chef's latitude or the independence with which they can say, I want to tweak the recipe. Here are the instructions you gave, but I'm gonna surprise you a little bit here. You could tell the chef, do it exactly like I want, or you could say, hey, bring some of your, expertise or how you're feeling today on a whim. You could say, I want to toss this in and change it up a little. That's like changing the temperature of the model, where you could say how variable, kind of inducing a little more randomness into it. And you could also say, I want a completely different chef or a whole different kitchen. You could go to a different model, and it could be performing differently based on, even if you give it the same cuisine, instructions, and allowed time and workspace size and ingredients. If you go to a different chef or kitchen, you could get a slightly different dish. Similarly, if you use a different model, it could occur differently. Like if you're using, one of the OpenAI models, or you're using a Claude model, or you're using a Quinn model, or all these other different ones, or DeepSeek, you can provide relatively similar, or even the same inputs and still get something a little bit different back. However, you're much more likely to get closer to what you wanted if you're using the personal chef, the API version, to get those instructions down specifically. So with this API, this is where you have more ability to control and be able to report and have your science be reproducible by giving these details and sharing these details. So if that's an important part of your research, then I would recommend looking at the API types of access where you can define these details. If this isn't the crucial part of your research, and you're using this in more of an assistive role with your manuscript development, then an API probably isn't needed, because that's not the reproducible part of your research. and you could use, kind of a chatbot interface. All right. So coming to final kind of key points here. The that we talked about today. First, AI isn't an author, at least currently. Um, and when you're using AI as part of your manuscript development, there are a lot of concerns, and there you'll see some editorials and papers about what can be happening as AI is introduced into the writing, the academic writing process. Um, Concerns about homogenization. We lose the variability, the distinct styles of writing or ideas. The bot slop, AI slop. We all know it tends to be extra wordy or converging on certain words and delving into certain things. Um, those are things that threaten the academic literature at large and things to be aware of. So don't lose your voice in it. Um, Number two, journals vary in their disclosure requirements. Check what they say. Look at what how they want you to disclose it or share it. And generally, copy editing is okay, but just double check with wherever you're submitting to. And number three, there are frameworks for reporting AI in research. If you are using AI as a kind of a core component of your research, check out those different frameworks depending on where in the cycle of research, it's you're reporting a protocol, your clinical trial, or actual predictive model or things like that. And then just the extra little flavor of, do you want to have kind of a waiter approach with the chatbot, or are you looking at the personal chef? I need this to be reproducible as much as possible in a controlled environment, and therefore I would want to use an API. And with that, we are done with the primary content. I'm happy to chat more about things or answer any questions and go over anything. And I'm not sure where the chat window is, just in case there are any things. I don't know if anybody can
I can
help me
keep an
with
eye
that.
on it if anybody has any questions, you can feel free to put it in the chat, or you can just unmute yourself.
All right. Thank you, Mike. All right. I think that's a good amount of time. Hopefully it's useful. You can refer back to it later, although things are always changing. So check in, for your particular journal or different types of things. Good luck with everything. And hopefully this will assist you in your kind of future endeavors and how AI can help you.